I've been collecting and using M42 fast 50 lenses for many years. I thought it would be helpful to make a video recommending the best lenses for different situations, including macro and product shots, portraits and landscapes. There are a lot of great lenses on the table, but I don't own every single M42 fast 50, ranging from 50mm to 60mm. So I'll also be highlighting some other lenses I don't own, including rare and expensive lenses I'd be happy to recommend for specific types of photography. Here's a list of the types of photographs I'm going to cover, ranging from ultra close-up shots all the way to landscapes and astro shots. I've included some photos from the lenses on this video, and you can see more on my Flickr stream, and of course it's easy these days to see images for particular lenses online. So let's start with ultra close-ups. This is an area where bellows are the best solution, attaching a standard M42 fast 50 lens to a set of bellows. Bellows can help get you really close up, much closer than other photography methods, as this comparison with other macro methods shows. There are a number of different makers of M42 bellows. I happen to have this set of Russian bellows, and they didn't cost very much, so they're a good way into ultra close-up photography. I used to think that any decent fast 50 could do a good job with bellows. But in practice, some fast 50s don't seem to adapt so well, and the macro sharpness differs by lens. I'm going to recommend an old lens that I used on a separate video about M42 bellows, and it's this Carl Zeiss Jena Tessa 50 f2.8. It needs to be well stopped down to around f11, but when it is stopped down, the lens is surprisingly sharp. For such an old design, it really performs very well, and it's one of the cheapest lenses to buy. So you could get this lens and an old set of bellows for not a lot of money. But many people prefer the convenience of a specialist macro lens. It goes without saying that a great macro lens needs to be very sharp, with the ability to get close to your subjects. And it should also have a smooth and sensitive focus ring, as you're going to be making some very small adjustments the closer you get. There are some good specialist macro lenses in M42 mounts, including the Volna 9 with its sawtooth blades, the Industar 61, and the excellent but rare and expensive Mamiya Seacor 60 f2.8 macro. However, the one that stands out to me in terms of IQ and value for money and its ergonomics is the Macro Takuma 50 f4. The earliest version is the one to get because it has 1:1 magnification. The later versions are 1:2. At f4 it's slow by today's standards, but what a beautifully engineered instrument it is. Just look at the engravings on the body, and the focus throw is perfect. It takes very sharp images right from f4 with great colours and bokeh. You know, I've never felt that with this lens I'm using an old film era lens that's nearly 60 years old. Its images seem just as contemporary as the most modern digital lenses. Now on to product shots, and I'm talking about relatively small product type shots, mostly tabletop shots. The key for product shots is to use a lens that produces a good, clean image with sharp details where it needs to be sharp and a 3D pop. The colours need to be accurate and there's no distracting bokeh, so smooth bokeh transitions, wide open and stop down are essential. So the best product lenses I've found are the slightly slower lenses. Looking through product shots with different lenses, one that stands out to me with an attractive 3D pop is the Zenitar M50 f1.7. It's a sharp lens and it has a very complementary background rendering. There also seems to be a pattern across a number of different lens makers and mounts, that their slightly slower f1.7 or f2 lenses seem to have better micro contrast than their faster lenses. I'm thinking of f1.7 or slower lenses from Yashica, Mamiya Seacor, Fuji and others, and they all make f1.4 lenses as well. The Yashica Yashino 50 f1.7, for example, is not the fastest Yashica lens, but it's one of my best product lenses. However, the lens I'm going to recommend as the best product lens is the Fuji Fujino 55 f1.8. Again, it's not the fastest M42 lens Fuji made, and it's not the more desirable EBC version, and it's not very expensive, but it's a lens that produces fine product images stopped down. Critically, it produces images that will, if you want, look like they were taken with a digital high-definition lens. Wide open at f1.8, the lens produces lovely background blur, which can in certain situations add an extra dimension to some product shots. But generally I wouldn't bother using this as a product lens wide open. The depth of field is too narrow. Stop down to f8 or beyond, it's bitingly sharp. It's a very well adjusted lens. Fuji optics are very good. Now on to bokeh shots. I've already posted videos on the best fast 50 bokeh lenses. It's quite a subjective area, but my overall winner at 50mm is the Carl Zeiss Jena Pancolor 50 f1.8, the 8-bladed radioactive version. This radioactive lens just produces gorgeous bokeh. And between 50 and 60mm, I go for another radioactive lens, the Tomioka Auto Revuenon 55 f1.2. Tomioka produced the only f1.2 lenses for the M42 mount, and this lens really does have amazing and unique bokeh effects. Aside from these lenses, I thought I'd look at bokeh from a different angle and talk about a few specialist bokeh styles. Starting with dreamy and painterly bokeh. If you're looking for a lens with dreamy and painterly bokeh, then I've found that the best lenses tend to be the early lesser coated lenses. That's because coatings are designed to filter flares and reduce ghosting and light leaks. But ghosting and light leaks actually help produce more dreamy painterly images wide open. There are a number of candidates amongst the early lenses here. The Carl Zeiss Jena Biotar, the early Takumas, the Ashika 5cm f2, the early Helios 44, and the early Meyer Optic Görlitz lenses. However, the very best lens for dreamy painterly bokeh is, in my opinion, relatively easy to select. It's the early Super Takuma 50 f1.4, the 8 elements version. This lens produces beautiful images, but it's also sharp enough wide open. It's a classic bokeh lens, one of the very best of all dreamy bokeh lenses. Now on to another specialist aspect of bokeh, bubble bokeh lenses. If you do research on the internet about bubble bokeh lenses, you'll probably get the idea that there are only a limited number of lenses that will fit the bill. However, I found that many of these fast 50s will produce bubble bokeh in the right conditions. It's less about the lens and more about a question of finding the right conditions. Even famous bubble bokeh lenses can't produce bubbles out of thin air, just like swirly lenses can't produce swirls if the conditions are not right. I'm going to highlight one bubble bokeh characteristic that many lenses actually find it hard to produce, and that is onion ring bokeh, where there's a distinct line around the bokeh balls. Only a few lenses can do this, and ironically, the effect is often created by lenses that don't have a very good optical design, and when designers saw onion rings, they'd try to eradicate them. There are one or two fast 50s I'd like to mention that can produce good onion ring bubbles. The Fuji Fujinon 55 f2.2 is a classic bubble maker, more onion rings than this f1.8 version. And then the early Super Takuma 55 f1.8 can also produce onion rings. The Mamiya Seiko 55 f1.4 can produce big onion ring bubble bokeh. The lens is said to be made by Tomioka and is very similar in design to the Auto Raikkonen 55 f1.4, another highly regarded bubble bokeh lens. But the winner here is the Meyer Optic Görlitz Primotar 50 f3.5. I purchased the Primotar lens because of onion ring bubble images I'd seen online, and in the right conditions it doesn't disappoint. You could also try the faster Meyer Trioplan 50 f2.9, but I'm very happy with this Primotar. Finally, in this specialist bokeh section, swirly bokeh. Swirly bokeh is a category dominated by the Helios 44s. The three early versions are well known to be the most swirly, the 44, the 44-2 and the 44-3, so I won't dwell on this area, except to say that there are some other M42 lenses that will swirl, and of the lenses here you could try this Cosina Cosinon 50 f1.7. It definitely swirls a bit, but not so obviously as the Helios. Now onto the best portrait lenses. Fast 50s are excellent lenses for portraits, even better perhaps on cropped sensors. For portraits of people in particular, you'll want good skin colours. You'll also want a good transition to a blurred background when the lens is stopped down a little, so that you can isolate heads and shoulders with smooth backgrounds. All of these fast 50s will take good portraits in the right hands, and with some of the lenses you're going to get a very unique style of rendering, different from modern digital lenses. The choice of lens will depend on the kind of portrait you want to take. For instance, if you want to isolate your subject against a really interesting swirly background, then go for an early Helios, for example. And then if you want a film style look that delivers strong features, two of the oldest M42 lenses here will be interesting choices. The Carl Zeiss Jena Biotar 58 f2 or the Takuma 58 f2. The Biotar is very sharp stop down, and this lens has 17 blades, which help a lot to smooth out the backgrounds. The Takuma 58 f2 is a rare lens with a Sonner design, and I know some people really like the rendering of Sonner designs. It certainly packs a punch. Both these lenses are especially good for black and white portraits. Another lens I'd like to highlight is the Zenitar M50 f1.7. It's a lens, as I've mentioned, for product shots, can give you attractive subject isolation with strong 3D look and quite soft backgrounds. You can see some great portraits with this lens online. To narrow down my final recommendations, I'm going to limit my final choice to 55+ lenses. The longer focal length can make a subtle but positive difference to portraits, especially head and shoulder portraits. Most of these 55mm plus lenses can give a good natural look to portraits, unlike the brutally sharp and sometimes unnatural rendering of modern digital lenses. And many of the old lenses are excellent performers, so it's a tough choice to identify the perfect portrait lens here. Having searched through my own photos and portraits on the internet, there are three standout lenses. The early Helios 44 is actually an M39 lens converted to M42. It's a good choice because it really is an excellent portrait lens, both wide open and stop down. Wide open you can go for a swirly bokeh background, or stop down you get a much smoother blur with those 13 blades. The colours and contrasts may need some post-processing, but the overall rendering of portraits with this lens is very attractive. The much later Helios 44 M7 is not a swirly bokeh portrait lens, but it produces lovely images and impressive portraits. It works particularly well outside because of the improved coatings, and although my version only has 6 blades, it's a very good portrait lens stopped down a bit. Some of the most engaging portraits I've taken of my family, both outside and inside in darker conditions, have been taken with the super multi-coated Takuma 55 f1.8. The lens has a beautiful rendering and the colours can be really good. It also has a rather lovely dreamy quality that gives you a slightly soft focus look, even though it's sharp as well. It's a highly regarded lens amongst owners, but it's quite underrated in the wider market in my opinion. Sports and fast-moving subjects is next, and this includes taking photos of active kids and birds and the like. It's a type of photography that requires a fast lens and easy-to-use controls. This cuts out a number of these lenses that are quite frankly rather clunky to use, with stiff focus movements, especially some of the lenses from Russia and East Germany. They may have strengths in other areas, but they're not good for focusing on fast-moving subjects. If I had to choose one manual lens for fast-moving subjects, between 50 and 60 millimeters, it would be the one with the smoothest focus movement of all old film lenses, a lens that also has good resolving power, and that would be the SMC Takuma 55 f1.8. The focus action is so smooth, it's a real pleasure to use. Now on to the best walk-around town lens. A good walk-around lens needs to be capable of covering scenes all the way from close-ups, to people snaps, to buildings, and occasionally landscapes. You want to avoid flares as much as possible, so we're looking for the best coatings. And preferably it won't produce much purple fringing, as there are likely to be trees and bright outlines in some of the compositions. A good walk-around lens also needs to be quick and easy to use, and preferably quite lightweight. In a way, the lens you're looking for is the very best all-round lens of all these lenses, a lens you can trust totally. If I'm limited to a fast 50 rather than a good wider angle lens or a zoom lens, I probably wouldn't take a 55mm lens. I want a little more angle than that. So of all these lenses, and I've used most of them as walk-around town lenses, what is the very best all-round lens? To me, it's the super multi-coated Takuma 50 f1.4. It's radioactive, but I've de-yellowed it, and I've used it as my preferred walk-around lens for years. It's never let me down at any task. It's sharp, with accurate colours, it doesn't produce much purple fringing, and it has excellent resolving power. It's a treat wide open and wonderful stop down, and it can produce images that look contemporary, not just film era. I'm guessing the only better walk-around lens might be a Leica, but that's off the agenda here. Moving out of town and onto landscapes, we're looking for a lens with excellent resolving power, corner-to-corner sharpness, and good contrasts. Better coatings will also make a strong difference. There's nothing more frustrating than taking a photo of a beautiful landscape, and when you get home it looks washed out and blurred towards the edges. Quite a few of these old lenses do suffer from a lack of contrast away from the center. It seems almost redundant to say this, but you'll need a lens that focuses properly at infinity, and sadly that's not something you can say about some of these lenses. They either focus past infinity on some adapters, or they're pretty weak at infinity, even if focused properly. As a general rule, if you want the best resolution, you should go for the most recent M42 lenses, or the most recent version in a series of lenses, because they're likely to have the best optics and coatings. For this video I tested all these lenses head to head on a landscape shot, and the lenses that had the best resolving power at infinity were the latest versions of the Takuma 50s and the Helios 44s. The SMC Takuma 50 f1.4's coatings really help to add a depth of contrast to landscape images, and the sharpness and colours are excellent. By the time the Helios 44 M7 was produced, the designers had ironed out the lack of edge-to-edge sharpness of the earlier versions, and the coatings are much improved. The contrasts are good, and it's mighty sharp stop down. It doesn't have the colour dynamics of these super multi-coated Takuma lenses, but there's something about the rendering that I really like. The Carl Zeiss Jena Pancolor 50 f1.8 radioactive version is also a lens worth considering for landscapes. It's a lens I especially like to use in the autumn, to capture autumn colours through its golden brown tinted glass. Finally, Astro photography. And I have to admit this is not an area where I've used these M42 fast 50s a lot. But what you're looking for here is a fast lens that you can stop down a bit, that has good center and edge sharpness, and has as few aberrations and purple fringing as possible. With these kinds of specs, I'm going to recommend the two landscape lenses again, the SMC Takuma 50 f1.4 and the Helios 44 M7, because they simply have better resolving power than most other M42 lenses. I'd like to end this video by mentioning some rare and expensive lenses I don't own, but they deserve a mention because they could easily be ranked as amongst the best in class for specific types of photography. Firstly, the Carl Zeiss Jena Pancolor 55 f1.4, a serious radioactive lens and one of the very best in terms of beautiful bokeh. Secondly, the Carl Zeiss Jena Ultron 50 f1.7. This is a lens with an inverted front element. It has a stellar reputation, perhaps better than the Voltlander Color Ultron 50 f1.8. Thirdly, the Zenitar SE1 50 f1.7. It's a lens with a square aperture blade setup, and it has superb optics. Fourthly, the Meyer Optic Görlitz Primo Plan, a lens design that was good enough to resurrect as a new lens not long ago. And last but not least, the Fuji EBC Fujinon 50 f1.4, a lens with a strong reputation and a loyal following. I'm sure you can add some more lenses to this list, and please do in the comments below. Now, I'm very conscious that the Takumas have done well across the categories. I've always been a big fan of the Takumas, but when I was testing the lenses, I thought I'd be able to spread the recommendations a little more evenly. However, in some categories, such as walk-around town lenses and landscapes, the image quality of the Takumas was really noticeably better than many other lenses that I thought would do well. It does give some credence to people that say that old glass is inferior to modern glass, but I think those people are wrong. The reality is that some old glass is superb and quite capable of shining as brightly on the largest modern sensors as modern digital lenses. And then some old lenses, that may not be so good in pure IQ terms, have other unique qualities that are well worth investing in. I hope you've enjoyed this video and it's been useful. Please subscribe to my channel and I'll produce some more videos. And any comments about my conclusions or other lenses you've used will be most welcome.